Welcome, Constance. And on behalf of all of us at Agnes Scott, I want to tell you how thrilled we are that you can join us this morning on the 50th anniversary of Freedom Summer, on the 125th anniversary of the founding of Agnes Scott. This is quite a year. And I have to tell you that I actually knew about Constance before I came to Agnes Scott. I had read the book Civil Rights, which is such a magnificent chronicle of how the civil rights movement played out in people's minds and hearts in small towns and in the most difficult of circumstances in rural Mississippi. And I was thrilled when I realized after I got here that she's a Scottie. And she truly is, as you think about our theme for Leadership Retreat, bold, brave, and brilliant. This woman on the stage with us this morning is all of those things. And I think one of the things I particularly want to, and you'll hear this as we speak, but one of the things I admire so deeply about Constance is that there are people who were deeply involved, as she was, in the civil rights movement, but for whom, if you will, time has frozen a little bit, and they live in, those were world historical activities and world historical times, and they changed the world. But the work of the civil rights movement remains unfinished, and Constance has always embraced the ongoing work of social justice and has continued to write and to speak and to think about issues of race and issues of justice in our country. I know she is very concerned about rates of incarceration among young black men. So this is a Scottie who not only played a leadership role at a time that this was very unusual for young white women to do so, but has continued to shape her life and her mission around these issues. So it is truly a privilege to have a chance to speak with you. So I want to begin by something, this is actually, Kajua was the one who discovered this, and we were so intrigued by it, which is that you share something with Agnes Scott in terms of being an Irish immigrant background. I gather that your mother immigrated from Ireland, and father. So both your parents came to the United States from Ireland. And I guess I'd just be curious, can you talk to us a little bit about growing up in Greensboro? How did you come to be conscious of, aware of issues of race and social justice? And what role did your family's Irish background play in that?
Well, I think that for my mother and father who came, they were born in Belfast, but when they got to this country, we lived for a little while in New Jersey, but then we moved to Greensboro, North Carolina. And I don't think Mother and Daddy had a clue you can imagine in the 30s and 40s, in the 50s, what they saw. And I remember my father saying, "Why do black people have to come to the back door? Why can't they come in the front door?" Just basic things. And they never did understand it. And of course, that's the atmosphere that I was raised in. And plus the fact, I often wonder if for immigrants, the concept of what this country's all about, if it doesn't make a deeper impression of, give me you're tired, you're poor, all of the ethics that this country's supposed to stand for. I think maybe immigrants take that to heart more, and the Constitution and the amendments and everything, that it meant more to them than people who were, born and raised in this country. But some of it must have rubbed off because in terms of the history of Ireland, I was telling Elizabeth, I'm going through all these papers. I'm a terrible saver of papers, and they are going to be at the Emory Archives. But I came across a paper I wrote at Agnes Scott on the 1916 Easter Rebellion in Ireland. And I think that somehow or other, even though my parents were Protestant and weren't the Irish Rebellion and Revolution, but some of the concepts of that must have rubbed off on me because I kept on writing papers about the the Irish Rebellion, and I think it may have been William Butler Yeats, but some poet begins a poem by saying, "Beware, masters, when the people shall rise." And that's what happened in the civil rights movement. The masters were the white people, and the people shall rise. So it was there was a lot of stuff that seeped through. My parents never preached about the civil rights or race or anything, but it seeped through.
I love that. And, my parents were Hungarian refugees, and a very similar experience of coming from another country and seeing America with different eyes.
Through different eyes,
yes,
yeah.
I love that. Tell us about your journey how did you come to be at Agnes Scott? And, how did you select it?
Well, it was just, like I say, my parents weren't, from here, so they didn't know about Agnes Scott. And I lived on West Market Street in Greensboro, North Carolina, and the Women's College, the University of North Carolina, was right across the street. And after I got out of high school, I wanted to go to college, and I had a boyfriend, and I was just going to go there. And then a friend told me about Agnes Scott. My parents weren't aware of all the colleges and everything, but anyway, Elizabeth McFeeters told me about Agnes Scott, and it was very expensive. I think tuition was, listen, tuition was $5,000. I think. Well, I may have that wrong. That couldn't be right. So anyway, whatever it was, my parents couldn't afford it. So Elizabeth said, "Why don't you apply for a scholarship?" I didn't know anything about Atlanta or Agnes Scott or anything, but I applied for a fellowship, and I got it. And then did they still have the work-study program? Well, I did the work-study program, and so I just came. Mother and Daddy put my bags in the car, and we drove from Greensboro to Atlanta. And I tell you, I have nothing but good memories about Agnes Scott. Although it was, I loved it, and I knew everybody's name. They had something called a Miss Heyday contest, and whoever could call most people by their first name would be proclaimed Miss Heyday, and I was proclaimed Miss Heyday. You were a named dame, but then if you got everybody, you were Miss Heyday. So it was very friendly, and I had a wonderful English teacher that I will never forget, and Catherine Sims, who was a history teacher, and I have nothing but really, good memories. But I didn't. It was just a stroke of luck and something that brought me to Agnes Scott. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. That's great. Now, you were a leader at Agnes Scott. You were a student, in addition to Miss Heyday, which I love. Maybe we should reinstitute that tradition. But you tell us about your leadership experiences as a student at Agnes Scott.
Well, I don't know. I just sort of fell into things, and I would run for this and run for that. I was talking to, when Elizabeth asked me to come, it brought back a lot of memories about Agnes Scott. And I got to tell you one thing that may have been one of the first signs of rebellion, but when we were freshmen, Emory was all men back then, and they used to send buses to Agnes Scott to pick freshmen up, to take them to the fraternity parties here. And I can remember saying, and I don't know where I got this sense of something, but I said, as a freshman, I said, "What do they think we are, cows?" I said, "Then I'm not going to get on a bus and be shipped to a fraternity party." Along with a bunch of freshmen, like, cows being taken to the stable. I said, it's really weird. And I remember that very clearly because it just was strange. Again, I don't know where that came from because I wasn't raised to be this. Well, I guess I was, because thinking back, I was lucky because I remember my mother used to say to my sister Eileen and to me, "This above all, to thine own self be true, and it then must follow as night the day. Thou canst not then be false to any man." Is that Shakespeare?
I think it is.
Yeah.
Do people? Is it Shakespeare?
Yeah, and my mother,
It's
I
Hamlet.
don't know where mother learned that, but I can remember standing in the kitchen once trying to make up my mind about something, and, this Shakespearean quote came out. So, and I took a lot of Shakespeare. Dr. Hayes taught Shakespeare. But anyway, there was that kind of, sort of atmosphere. So, I didn't, when I ran for student body president and was president of the sophomore class and all that, it wasn't ambition. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was through Agnes Scott, who belonged to something called the United States National Student Association, which was a national organization of student governments. And I got involved with that because I went to a meeting at Georgia Tech, and they were members of NSA back then, and Emory and a lot of colleges were. I went to this meeting at Georgia Tech, and they were talking about this national association of student body presidents and other students that would meet in one of the Midwestern college campuses with student governments from all over the country. And that group way back then was desegregated. I mean, they had colleges, black colleges that were members of NSA. And Agnes Scott joined early on. And in fact, I was looking through some old papers, and I came across Agnes Scott News. One is really old. This is 1933. And I was just talking to Kajua and Elizabeth. The name of the Agnes Scott paper back then is the Agonistic, Agonistic. And I don't know what that means because it's sort of...
Doesn't sound good somehow.
It sounds, it's a combination of agony and Agnes, but the Agonistic, 1933. And here's a newspaper article from the Agnes Scott News. Interracial Forum meets in Atlanta. And that's kind of interesting.
For 1933.
For 1933, and Agnes Scott sent a delegate to that interracial forum. Now, again, that names all the people who speak, and they were all men. There wasn't any. But anyway, Agnes Scott went to that. And then I came across another old Agnes Scott News. This is 1950, and this 1949, this says, Agnes Scott is not ready for NSA, and neither financially, psychologically, politically, nor practically. Anyway, I'm giving these articles from these old newspapers to the archives at Agnes Scott. And then here's another one. NSA representative reports on arrivals at an international conference. So NSA definitely was a big influence in my life, and the fact that Agnes Scott already belonged was really, really something. Now, I must admit that when I first would go to the meetings of the Atlanta colleges, I would go because there were cute men from Georgia Tech that would go there. But and I met an awful lot of interesting people. But when NSA came out in favor of some, I can't remember what the issue was, but whatever it was in favor of desegregation, and Georgia Tech dropped out of NSA, Emory dropped out of NSA. Agnes Scott and Wesleyan were the only two white colleges that remained members of NSA after they took a stand on desegregation. So, and I was chair of the region, and the only ones, like I say, were Agnes Scott and Wesleyan, and then all black colleges. So I would go to Morehouse and to Spelman, but at Agnes Scott, back then, if you were going to go to an interracial meeting, you had to have permission from home. Now, you have to remember that segregation was the law of the land back then. So I think Agnes Scott was, trying to make sure it protected himself. But my mother, in her own inimitable way, after she got tired of writing, Constance Curry has our permission to go to a meeting at Spelman College. My mother said, "Can I write a blanket permission?" And that says you can go to one anytime rather than write one every time you want to go. So anyway, that was the part. Agnes Scott was very influential in reinforcing what was already deep in my heart.
That's
Yeah.
wonderful. It's so interesting. Tell us about, kind of you went to Morehouse and Spelman. How did that come across with other students? I mean, tell us what race relations and conversation about race relations was like among the students at Agnes Scott in the 50s.
Well, we really didn't talk about it. They knew what I was doing, and I always think it's interesting that in spite of my doing that, they still, people said, "Gosh, I bet you were an outcast," and I said, "No, I was student body president. I went on the experiment in international living my junior year. I was Phi Beta Kappa. I was mortarboard. I was the Agnes Scott dream girl. Everything Agnes Scott women are supposed to do. And so I don't know. I was never an outcast because of my stands. Now I don't know why. I'm just such a charming personality.
Absolutely. So now you were the first white woman elected to the executive committee of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Tell us about that. How did that come to be? What was that like to be the only white woman there?
When I moved down here, which was January of 1960, I was the National Student Association had just gotten a grant from the Ford Foundation to set up what was called the Southern Student Human Relations Project. And they asked me to come south and be the director to set up an office in Atlanta. Like I say, everything was segregated, so I couldn't organize meetings as such, but the challenge of that project, which was funded by the Ford Field Foundation then, was to get black and white students to talk together and to meet together and to start trying to do some breakthrough, even though everything was segregated by law. So that's why I came to Atlanta in 1960. All right, February 1st, 1960, the beginning of the sit-ins in Greensboro, North Carolina, my own hometown. It was really weird. I was in Greensboro at my sister's house getting stuff to move south to Atlanta, turn on the radio, and it says, 4 students from A&T College are sitting at counters in Woolworths in downtown Greensboro. Well, we'd never heard of sit-ins, but it was weird that I was there that first day. Then I moved to Atlanta, and after February 1st, the sit-ins snowballed from Greensboro across the south, so that by June of 1960, there were 70,000 students sitting in, marching, demonstrating all over the South. And it was just incredible. Now, most of them were black students, but there were white people too. And I remember, I guess it was in late February, I got a call from Lonnie King, who was at the Morehouse, who was the chair of the Atlanta Student Movement at that point. And Lonnie had heard about the NSA project, and I had this little office, and and Julian Bond kids me to this day. He says the only reason we asked you to be on the executive committee is because you had a mimeograph machine and a postage machine. And I thought it was my brilliant mind and personality. I said, no, it was you. But anyway, I was out of college, and they were looking for 2 adults advisors, and Ella Baker, who was like in her 50s at that time, who was a brilliant black woman, one of the finest leaders of, and you all probably should read some of the books about Ella Baker. But anyway, they asked Ella and me to be the adult advisors on the executive committee. So even though I was just 3 or 4 or 5 years older than the students in the movement, yeah. And I was with SNCC, never as one of the, but as I went to all the meetings down on Auburn Avenue, yeah.
Wow. So now fast forward just to Freedom Summer, which we're now marking 50 years. What do you remember of that summer, of Freedom Summer, and how that played out in your own life?
Well, I wasn't, I was not a participant in Freedom Summer because by that time I was working, I had left NSA and I was working for the, for the American Friends Service Committee at that point. By the way, I brought a paper I forgot to read. This is dated August 9th, 1960, and we were living in Virginia Highlands. Donna McGinty and Jane Stembridge, who are both white, and were both in the movement. And we had an apartment right off of Highland Avenue. And this is, Dear Miss Curry, McGinty, Stembridge, and Kilstein, you are hereby given notice, as verbally given last evening, to vacate your apartment immediately. Drinking, noise, and association with colored men on a social basis are not allowed in this building or on the grounds. Do not have Negroes here. Get out of the apartment by Thursday, August 11th at 6 p.m. Now, I always get tickled because Elizabeth and I were talking about my being on one of the founders of the Center for Civil and Human Rights, and when I went to the opening meeting to get that center started, the head of the agenda said, a civil rights museum for Atlanta, this city too busy to hate. And I remember, this was 7 or 8 years ago, I raised my hand. Shirley Franklin had asked me to be on the committee. Most of the people there didn't know me. A few people did, but a lot of people didn't. But anyway, I raised my hand and I said, I'm sorry, but I can't be on any committee that is calling Atlanta the city too busy to hate. And I quoted some of the stuff about Atlanta. And that image really makes me sick to this day. You know, Atlanta is not the city too busy to hate. We had people like Lester Maddox and others who were, I have photos of them with loaded guns looking to shoot black students if they did certain things. So anyway, I got diverted. I wanted to.
So what happened? Did you have to leave your apartment?
Oh yeah, we moved. We were out by 6 p.m. Moved over to Moreland Avenue the next day. But you know, it's just people don't believe this actually took place in Virginia Highlands in there. But anyway, so I was working for the American Friends Service Committee by the time Freedom Summer came. But I did go to the reunion a few weeks ago. Of the 50th, because so many of my friends, you know, were actually with there for Freedom Summer. I was in Mississippi that summer, but by then I was working for the Quakers, for the American Friends Service Committee. Yeah, but the Freedom Summer reunion was really wonderful. You know, there were 1,200 people at Tougaloo College, and it was really great time, yeah. And I'll tell you something that we started there. There was the fourth chairman of SNCC after John Lewis was Stokely Carmichael, and then there was another one, guy named Rap Brown. Now he, by that time, people had pretty much given up on the possibility of much racial progress, and a lot of the black students some of them joined the Black Panthers, others did other things, but rap Brown went on and he became a Muslim, and he ultimately moved to Atlanta and changed his name to Jamil Al-Amin. And you all wouldn't know this, but about 14 years ago, there was a policeman who was shot and killed, and Jamil was arrested for supposedly killing that policeman. And I went to every day of his 3-week trial, and it was clear. It was right after 9/11, and it was clear that the fact he was named Jamil Al-Amin didn't help. But anyway, he was tried and put in life imprisonment for the murder of this policeman. And he was in jail down in Georgia, Reedsville, Georgia, for 7 years. And then he was lifted in the middle of the night and taken to solitary confinement in an underground facility in Denver, Colorado, where he's been for 7 years. None of us, his wife nor his attorneys here, even knew what had happened to him. So that's been one of the things that we're trying to do, is get Jamil to get brought back to Atlanta. But in the meantime, he's very ill. So they wouldn't give him the treatment that he needed at that underground. He's 71 years old. But anyway, one of the things we did at the SNCC reunion at the 50th was we got about 1,000 people at that conference to sign a petition to Obama and to Eric Holder and to Charles Samuels at the Federal Bureau of Prisons to get Jamil moved. And we raised so much cane about it. And finally, he's now at Butner, which is a medical facility, and they're testing him for cancer. And our next big campaign is to keep him from being sent back to solitary, where they didn't give him tests, they didn't do anything for all those years. So that was one good thing about Freedom Summer, because it wasn't just reminiscence, it was the rallying about stuff that's going on today.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I know that you have you've written and been active in the movement to raise the issue of the high rates of incarceration of young black men as a civil rights issue. Can you talk to us about that, about kind of your sense of, what are the most important civil rights issues today?
Well, that certainly for me is one of them, because it has to do with, there's so many innuendos and so much stuff about it. I actually overheard, I was in Alabama, and I don't know what I was doing anyway, somehow or other, no, it was Mississippi, sorry. I ended up in the Mississippi legislature, and I actually overheard a white Mississippi legislator talking to some friend, and he said, my brother is the sheriff up in Greenwood, Mississippi, and we've got a private prison up there. And he said, you can believe, he said, my brother's on the board of Correction Corporation of America. It sounds like a conflict of interest to be sheriff and be on that board. But anyway, he said, you can believe my brother keeps tries to keep that prison as full as possible. It said, and he mostly tries to get young black men into that jail. Oh, this was around the time when there was a lot of the papers talking about how pretty soon this country, with immigration and everything, pretty soon whites will no longer be in the majority. So anyway, this guy said, my brother keeps puts as many young black men into prison as possible. Because if you have them in prison, one, when they get out, they can't vote because of felony disenfranchisement. And secondly, if we keep them in jail, they won't be able to have babies, and then we can stay in power. I couldn't believe my ears that he was actually articulating that. But that's kind of what's scary about the incarceration. And we had a school here that was an alternative to school for public schools, and they used to, if you acted up when you used to go to the principal's office back in the day, now you'd get sent to this alternative school. And if you did anything at the alternative school without going through anything, you would be sent to, and it was all black because most of the public schools in Atlanta, as you know, are black. But anyway, they would be sent to prison if you messed up at this school. So the statistics are something like 80% of the people in Georgia prisons are young black men. And so it's just something, and you know, most of us, including me growing up, you didn't think about prisons. You'd see these big old buildings, but you didn't wonder what happened on the inside. So it's just probably one of the biggest issues right now is to keep this huge number of young black men going to prison. Had a friend who was down outside of Walnut Grove Prison, which is a private juvenile prison outside Jackson, Mississippi, 13 to 21 years, 20 years at this prison. And Valinda, my friend, who is black, who's from New York, was visiting down there, and she was looking up through the barbed wire at the Walnut Grove prison, and she felt somebody tug at her shirt. She looked down, and it was like a young black guy, about 11, and she looked down and said, hello, and he said, you know, he pointed up through the barbed wire, and he said, that's where I want to go. And she said, what? And he said, yeah. He said, my friends tell me you get 3 hots and a cot in there, and it's cool in the winter, and cool in the summer and warm in the winter, and you get free books. He said, I thought maybe since you were my color, maybe you could help get me in. And I thought, is this the results of is this the outcome of the civil rights movement in this day and age, that a young kid wants to get incarcerated? It's unbelievable. Mm. So anyway, that's one of my main concerns.
Well, it is inspiring to me that you continue to fight the fight. Now, as you look back at your work with SNCC, with the American Friends Service Committee, our theme is to be bold and brave. Were you ever afraid?
You know, I don't remember being afraid, and I don't know whether I sublimated it or what, but we were so lucky then because the movement people, they used to call it the circle of brothers and sisters, and it was we were so close-knit and we were so clear. I remember when we used to gather in a circle and cross and sing We Shall Overcome. I think we really believed it. Mm-hmm. It was a very, very idealistic, very close group. I mean, when we all see each other who were in the civil rights movement here, 50 years later, we run up and embrace each other. It was, it was so clear that we were doing what needed to be done. I don't ever recall being afraid, and I was white, so I could get away with a lot.
You had race privilege on your side.
Race privilege, yeah. And I never went to jail, because my role, particularly in when I was around where sit-ins or picketing and stuff, was that I was called an official observer, and so my role was to watch what was going on, and then to report it either to news people who were on our side, or to call Don Hollowell or attorneys and say, Lonnie King and 40 other students were just arrested for picketing Riches, and you need to do this, that, and the other. So I was never in real horrible danger. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of like my friends, yeah.
As you think about the people in the movement, is there somebody in particular that you most admire?
Not in this. Of course, I knew Dr. King very well, and of course, I admired him. In fact, I was thinking about it. The last time I saw Dr. King, he was working to start the Poor People's Campaign, and I was on the planning committee for that, representing the American Friends Service Committee. And right before he flew to Memphis, we had a meeting at Ebenezer Baptist Church, and I remember going up to him afterwards. He had filled us in on some of the things he wanted us to do for the Poor People's Campaign, and I went up to him, and it's like he was here, he was standing, and he was talking to somebody on his right side, and I came up here and to talk to him, and like I'm Dr. King, and I come up here, and he put out his left hand, and he said, excuse my left hand, Connie, but it is the one closest to my heart. And 2 days later, he was dead in Memphis. But isn't that a wonderful memory to have of him saying that to me? So I guess in terms of admiring, it would be Dr. King. But in terms of Julian Bond and John Lewis and a lot of the people I
it's an incredible.
Really, admire. And Jane Stembridge, who was a white woman who was the first executive coordinating secretary for SNCC. I admired her. We were all equals. Yeah.
It's great. Well, I know that Constance was very eager to get questions from current Scotties. So, without further ado, let's open the floor. And Kijua, will we be passing a mic around?
Elizabeth, there is one other thing that I wanted to do. As you can gather, there are a lot of people who are in SNCC, and the ones you hear the most about are men, like Stokely Carmichael and Julian and John Lewis and everybody. And I guess about 10 years ago, there were a group of SNCC women and movement women who decided that they wanted to talk about their role in SNCC and to show the importance of the women in the movement. And about 10 of them got together, and they got 52 women who were in the civil rights movement to write about 10 or 15 pages, and they published this book. It was just published at the University of Illinois. It's called Hands on the Freedom Plow. 52 women in the movement. And I brought this copy, and I want to give it to, I don't know how you're going to circulate that. Yeah. I have a chapter in there. It's called An Official Observer, but this is really a revealing book. I was going through it, and I was close to a couple of women in Albany, and one of the black women in this book was raped by the guard in the Albany prison. None of us ever even knew that. You keep nodding your head like you already know all of this.
I read a lot about this era.
Huh?
I read a lot about this era.
Oh, okay. But anyway, I wanted you to, yeah. Okay, just wanted to give you the book, yeah.
We're going to start here, and then we're going to come around, okay? So we're going to start this row, then we're going to come around. So I'll do this. Hi. Please say your name and your class. Okay, my name is Bria Carr. I'm a senior here at Agnes Scott College. You kind of really already answered my question. I was going to ask, were you present in Greensboro at the time of the sit-in? I got the opportunity to go and see the diner where it actually took place in Greensboro, North Carolina, and it was very moving. I really just want to say thank you for being different and for being bold and brave and brilliant when it was a hard decision to make. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Brittany Jackson. I'm a senior at Agnes Scott College. Excuse my eagerness, I'm sorry. But I have read a lot about this era, and I was wondering if you could tell me about some of your time with Stokely Carmichael and also like just the being in SNCC during that whole transition to when a lot of young Black students were transitioning into the Black Panthers, and what that transition felt like, or what that was like, you know, organization-wise. Like, I don't know, any of your thoughts on that?
Well, that transition was difficult. As you know, after '64 summer, there was a SNCC meeting when Stokely and some of the other people felt that that what the white people in SNCC ought to sort of go try organizing in the white community. So a lot, and I was lucky because I was never, you know, a SNCC staff person or that close, so I didn't feel the being removed out of SNCC as deeply as a lot of Casey Hayden and some of the other people felt it more strongly. But I could understand, because Black Power wasn't, the concept wasn't for blacks to be exercised, I mean, to be ahead of anything. It wasn't a devastating thing for white people. It was a call for Black people to use the power that they had gained through the Civil Rights Act, through the Voting Rights Act. It was really a call for communities to organize to use the power that they had gained, and it was pretty much, it was a lot misunderstood by Stokely and others calling for, you know, saying Black Power. But I understood it, and to me it was sort of a natural evolution of what had happened, because, you know, there were churches burned and people were killed in '64, Michael Schwerner, Cheney and Goodman and all that, and it was just a transition out of the beloved community aspect, which is, you know, my main memory, into the need for more militant stuff. And, you know, it has always irritated me that people quote Stokely at that Waveland conference at that end of that summer when talking about women in the movement, and him saying the only position for women in the movement is prone. And people, you know, he was joking, and the women who were there, they all laughed, but they always, you know, named that with Stokely as being anti-women, you know, but it was very interesting, you know, time, yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Holden. I'm a junior, and I wrote my question down. All right, so social justice is really, really popular at Agnes Scott College, and I feel like a lot of it's the method and the media that we use for it is changing. It's becoming very digital, and I'm really interested in your thoughts on how social justice movements have been changing in the modern era, and if you have any advice for younger people who are interested in doing more.
I don't do advice.
Just your thoughts then.
I don't know, things are so complicated in a way for your generation, because you don't get hit in the face with stuff like back in, you know, in our day, things. Julian Bond and I were stopped by a policeman once for riding in the same car. I mean, you know, you don't have your everything just sort of slapped in the face about things. It's very complicated to know now, and you know, women are more equally treated now. It's I think it's hard to know. What's your main perception of the injustices in going on right now?
Me personally?
Pardon?
Like me personally, or? Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
I have a very long and very ranty blog that goes much more in depth than I possibly could sitting here. I have way too many opinions to sum up this past.
You what?
I have way too many opinions to sum up this fast. I'm just
Oh,
more
okay.
curious about how you feel about the method and of, message delivery changing, I guess.
Constance, are you on social media at all?
No. I don't do Facebook. I use my cell
Props.
phone only to receive and send calls. That is something that I feel about your generation that's really scary. Is I was walking down the street in Midtown where I live, and there was this woman in front of me on her phone walking along, going blah 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 blah, and she had a dog, and the dog saw me behind, and he ran out, and she was doing like this, and I tripped over his leash and fell over the leash. She didn't even stop, and I hate to tell you what I called her because because she never even turned around. But anyway, I'm serious. I don't know. And I go down to this restaurant in Midtown, and I was sitting at the bar getting ready to order some food to go, and I counted 5 young people. Well, I don't know, some of them were like 30 and 40 younger than me, but anyway, every single one of them was glued to their thing, or they're either doing like this, or they're talking into it, or and I really think it's ruining y'all's communication abilities, and nobody looks each other in the eye anymore. I saw a couple who actually were texting to each other. They were across the table, and they were texting each other. And there's some articles that have been written that's talking about the fact that your generation is losing your ability to communicate as humans. So that's a pretty big one.
That answers that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ari Strudler. I'm a senior, finally. I just wanted to ask you, as a person who studies like political science and sovereignty and human rights, do you think the world, this is really pessimistic, will ever care about what's going on, and what do you think it will take for us to stand up for our fellow human beings, the injustices that are happening in the world, name a country, there's something terrible going on, and what's your opinion on that, like on the global scale, about will there be change?
What's happening in on the Palestine, Israel, I mean, all of that is just absolutely unbelievable, and I don't know what's going to come of that. I really don't. And of course, things slip away, just like with the Supreme Court, what they did with the voting rights bill. They now are using that to keep black people from voting in Mississippi, because if you don't have the correct identification. So things are sort of slipping away, as I see it, on international and on the national level. The other thing y'all need to be aware of is what Georgia's doing on the question of immigrants. The immigrants here, their children can't go to certain state schools, and I don't know, there's just so many injustices and little things. There's nothing huge like the racism and segregation and the stuff that, some of the battles we fought, but the battles are out there, and that's why y'all don't have to not look into your iPhone, Dewberry, whatever those pods.
Hi, I'm Fatima Austin. I'm a junior at Agnes Scott, of course. And I really wanted to kind of talk about what's going on in America right now. So I wanted to see your thoughts about what's going on in Ferguson, Missouri, or St. Louis. That's actually my hometown. So I'm kind of, have you heard about what's going on?
Where?
With in Ferguson, Missouri, or St. Louis, Missouri? Yeah, with the Michael Brown case.
I saw something about the Michael Brown thing, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I kind of want to know your thoughts about police brutality against African Americans, and just to see like your ideas about it, or just like your thoughts.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
I wanted
Ideas
to-
about what?
Police brutality.
Police brutality against
Oh,
Against
well,
African
that's another issue that people, that we all overlook all the time, and it's everywhere still, and it's one of the things that we need to fight against. I don't know how you organize around that, but it's definitely one of the issues in this country.
Yeah, it definitely is. I
Yeah.
know that in general in St. Louis, there's been so many different, like, nonviolent like protests, and it's been absolutely crazy. Like, looks like it's like really like almost like a militarized war zone that's kind of going on against like the peaceful protests. It's going on in America, and it's just
Wow.
absolutely ridiculous. Like tear gas, all kinds of stuff, and it's terrible.
Oh,
And
gosh.
I know that I really want to do something, get involved to kind of just protest against it in Atlanta. I know Tyler and I were going to work on to start something, so we can work on it.
Great,
So
yeah.
everyone feel free to join us. And
So I was actually a two-part question, so I was going to ask that as a part of my two-part question, but I'm glad she got a chance to ask it. I'm actually from Missouri also. Yeah, so, but I wanted to ask because my friends, I made a bunch of international friends last semester, and they were very interested in the civil rights movement. So we went to Dr. King's church, the Baptist church off of Freedom Parkway, and then we drove down to Birmingham to the Civil Rights Institute, and we all sat, and I mean, it was overwhelming. It was an emotional overload. We all had to sit in the car in silence afterwards for a while, and because there's a burned bus in the monument there. I don't know if you've ever been. So I don't know. It's another world, and I didn't know the Atlanta one opened, and I'm excited for that. So my question for you, it's kind of a two-part of my two-part question, but. What was I'm sitting, by the way. My name's Amanda Fitzgibbons. I'm a senior. Nice to meet you.
Okay.
My two-part question is because I love Dr. King. I grew up loving Dr. King. I have some of his memoirs, some of his biographies, some of his plagiarized work, actually a little bit if you know about that. And anyway, I wanted to know what it was like to know him, what he was really like as a person, and I wondered, you said you were the Ebenezer Baptist Church. Did you hear the speech he made that I'm on the mountaintop? Were you there? For
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
No way. I mean, like, that's so.
Oh, well,
I love that speech of his.
well,
That's one
I
of my
was-
favorites. That was his last speech.
Yeah, well, I feel so lucky because I knew him as a person, and he was funny, and he was he was brilliant, and I heard him speak. And one of the most moving memories of it is like in Grenada, Mississippi, this little town, went to a mass meeting, and he would get up, and here would be all these, black people from rural areas who had never even thought of breaking free from the servitude and the sharecropping and all the carryovers from before the Civil War almost. And he would get up there and he would have people singing and crying and clapping and seeing hope, for change. But as a human being, he was just a very smart, warm, good sense of humor, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And what a amazing thing that I knew him and heard him, got to hear him speak. But he was just a really nice man. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Back then, during, when you were really active in the civil rights movement during the 50s and 60s, did you and your peers imagine the world as it is today?
Oh, no.
Okay.
You never know what's going to happen. I mean, just like the police brutality question, you just can't tell. You really can't. I don't think. Yeah.
But did you imagine that there would be
Yeah, I think so, because, I mean, you know, I saw the Civil Rights Act, which eliminated, I mean, all of a sudden, we could all stay at the same hotel, we could all ride the bus together, we could ride in cars together without getting stopped, people could vote. You know, there's now more, Mississippi has more black legislators than white legislators. You know, so we saw the change and believed it. The problem is that a lot of this is sort of, I mean, we need to face the fact that this country has two meaningful things that they fight for. That's power and money. And that's what runs this country. And it's just like when I talked to some friends or some people who would be considered, I guess, middle class, who also were black, you know, the values are, it's interesting how those things seep into your personality and your being when you get money and power, because these black couples would say, when we're talking about the fact that the Atlanta police actually, Atlanta drug dealers, when they get drugs from heroin or from overseas or from wherever, and they get the drugs, they actually give them to young black men so that they will become drug dealers, so they can get arrested. And this black friend of mine was telling me about what some friends of hers said who live in a pretty good section of Southwest Atlanta. They said, we're against them. We don't want those drug dealers in our neighborhood. So instead of wondering about the young black men where they're getting the drugs, they've joined the, you know, middle class about where it's me above all. So money and power is what controls this country. And, you know, I think we have to fight against that regardless of race, creed, or color, because, you know, it's everywhere. Yeah. Not a good note to end on, but...
It does point to the struggle goes on.
The struggle goes on. Yeah.
Constance, thank you so much.